We need to write Chapter 1 of Episode 1 for a dark, gritty military sci-fi series. The chapter must be extremely long, 800-100 words, highly detailed, show don't tell like top-tier sci-fi. The previous context, KAL's squad battles a sentient ship that is a living infection. KAL orders strike on reactor core, ship's pulse fault errs and surges, voice returns claiming them, KAL vows fight back. So Chapter 1 should be the beginning of Episode 1, not continuing that exact scene. The instruction says, write Chapter 1 of 12 for Episode 1, and gives previous story context. That context seems like it might be from a later episode or a teaser. But we need to write the first chapter of the first episode, so we should start from the beginning of the story, introducing KAL and the situation. The context provided might be a summary of what happens later, but we need to write the opening chapter. To be safe, we can write Chapter 1 as the initial encounter or setup. Let's interpret. The previous story context is given to inform the tone and setting, so we write Chapter 1 that leads up to that moment. Or is it a continuation? The instruction says previous story context, meaning that the background for the chapter we are to write, but then it says write Chapter 1 of 12 for Episode 1. That implies this is the very first chapter of the series, so we should start from the beginning. I'll write an opening scene where KAL's squad is infiltrating the alien ship, discovering its living nature. That fits the context. I'll make it extremely detailed, gritty, with heavy dialogue and psychological suspense. Aim for 800-100 words. The airlock cycled with a sound like cracking bone. Lieutenant KAL pressed his gauntlet against the inner hatch, feeling the vibration, not metal but something organic, a low thrum that pulsed against his palm like a diseased heartbeat. The squad's helmet lights cut narrow cones through the gloom, revealing walls that glistened with a slick Venus sheen. This was no vessel, it was a wound. Contact, Sergeant Mir whispered, her voice a razor in the comm. Pressure differential's wrong. Atmosphere reads methane, ammonia, and blood. Human blood. KAL's jaw tightened. The intel had called it a derelict, a captured cruiser from the first wave, but the Alliance had lied, or they hadn't known. Either way, they were inside a living thing. Standard breach formation. Watch your corners. If it moves, burn it. The squad moved like ghosts through a cathedral of flesh. Corporal Vance took point, his pulse rifle sweeping left, right, up. Every surface seemed to breathe. The corridor narrowed, walls pulsing inward, forcing them into single file. KAL's boots squelched on a floor that wept a clear, viscous fluid. It smelled of copper and rot. Command, this is Talon 6, KAL subvocalized into his helmet mic. We are inside the target. Designation is incorrect. Recommend immediate orbital strike. Repeat, this is not a ship. It is a biological construct. We are compromised. Static, then a voice not from the comm but from inside his skull. You are not compromised. You are home. KAL froze. The squad halted. Mir's head snapped toward him, her visor reflecting a faint bioluminescent glow from the walls. Sir, did you hear that? Silence, he ordered. The voice had been resonant, ancient, and utterly certain. It was the same voice that had whispered to him in dreams since the Battle of Proxima. He never told anyone, now it was real. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, a cathedral of ribs and sinew. At its center, a pulsating mass the size of a dropship, the reactor core according to schematics. But it was no fusion pile, it was a heart. Tendrils spread from it like arteries, feeding the walls, the floor, the ceiling. And embedded in the tissue, half digested, were the remains of the cruiser's crew. Their armor had fused with the flesh. Their eyes were open, staring, still alive. Sweet void, Vance breathed. They're incorporated. A figure detached itself from the heart mass. It wore the tattered uniform of an Alliance captain, but its skin was translucent, veins glowing with a sickly green light. It spoke with the voice that had invaded KAL's mind. You are the first to reach the core. The others screamed. You are quiet. I like that. KAL raised his rifle. Identify yourself. I am the infection, the ship, the voice. I have many names. Your species calls us the silent void, but we are not silent. We sing and we are hungry. Mir opened fire. Her pulse bolt struck the captain's chest, burning holes that sealed instantly. The thing did not flinch. It smiled with a mouth too wide. You cannot kill a song, it said, but I can unmake you. Join me. Your flesh will become part of the chorus. Your thoughts will echo forever. KAL's mind raced. The tactical data scrolled across his HUD. The heart mass was the nexus. A direct hit on its core might sever the creature's connection to the ship. But the pulse rifle fire was being absorbed. They needed something heavier. Vance, demo charges, set them for simultaneous detonation. Mir, cover fire. I'll draw its attention. Sir, that's suicide, Mir hissed. It's the only play, do it. KAL stepped forward, lowering his rifle. He walked toward the heart, toward the infected captain, his boots leaving prints in the weeping floor. The thing watched him, curious. You are different, it said. You have been touched before. I can taste the scar on your mind. You dream of me. I dream of burning you, KAL replied. He was close enough to see the captain's eyes, human, terrified, trapped inside the alien will. Your heart beats for nothing. We are the fire that extinguishes stars. The creature laughed, a sound like grinding glass. Brave. But bravery is only meat that hasn't learned to blade. Kale triggered his wrist-mounted plasma cutter. A white-hot blade erupted and he drove it into the heart mass. The ship screamed. A psychic shockwave threw the squad against the walls. The captain's form dissolved into a spray of ichor. The heart mass convulsed, its pulse faltering, then surging with violent fury. You cannot sever what has already claimed you, the voice thundered inside Kale's skull. You are mine. You have always been mine. Kale staggered, blood streaming from his nose. He looked at Vance, who was setting the last charge. Now, he gasped, detonate. The charges blew. A chain of fire ripped through the chamber. The heart mass ruptured, spewing black bile. The ship's pulse stuttered, slowed, stopped for a moment's silence. Then the walls began to weep again. The pulse returned, stronger, faster. The voice whispered, you cannot kill a song, but I can teach you to sing. Kale pulled his sidearm, aimed at the regenerating core, and fired. We'll fight, he said, his voice raw. We'll burn every cell. We'll carve our names into your extinction. The chamber trembled. The squad formed a tight circle, backs to each other, weapons ready. Outside, the silent void's armada drifted closer. Inside, the infection began to grow. Chapter 2, Ashes in the Pulse. The chamber's walls shuddered like lungs gasping for air, slick with black ichor that dripped in rivulets down the organic plating. The squad's boots sank into the viscous sludge coating the floor, each step accompanied by a wet suction that threatened to hold them in place. The air was heavy, metallic, saturated with the stench of burnt plasma and alien bile. Every breath felt like inhaling rust. Kale's visor flickered, static crawling across his HUD. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing the alien pulse that reverberated through the ship. He wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his gauntlet, smearing crimson across the steel. His voice was hoarse, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. Form up, tight circle, no gaps. If it moves, burn it. Vance crouched low, his hands trembling as he reloaded the charge launcher. The weapon's casing was scorched, its barrel glowing faintly from overuse. He muttered under his breath, words Kale couldn't catch, but the rhythm was steady like a prayer or a curse. His eyes darted to the regenerating core, its surface knitting together with strands of living tissue that writhed like serpents. Captain, Vance rasped, it's healing faster than before. We're not cutting deep enough. Kale's jaw clenched. Could feel the voice pressing against his skull, whispering in tones that were neither sound nor thought but something in between. You are marrow, you are dust, you are mine. He forced the intrusion back, grinding his teeth until his jaw ached. We'll cut deeper, Kale said. We'll carve until nothing's left. The chamber's ceiling bulged, veins swelling, then split open with a wet crack. A torrent of bile cascaded downward, splattering across armor and weapons. The squad staggered, raising arms to shield their visors. From the rupture, tendrils slithered down, tipped with barbed hooks that clattered against steel. Contact, shouted Ray's, her voice sharp, commanding. She swung her pulse rifle upward, unleashing a burst of blue-white fire. The tendrils recoiled, shrieking in a chorus that rattled the bones of every soldier present. Kale pivoted, plasma cutter igniting once more. The blade hummed a line of white fury. He slashed through a descending tendril, severing it clean. The stump writhed, spraying ichor that hissed as it struck the floor. Hold the perimeter, Kale barked. No breaches. The squad tightened formation, backs pressed together, weapons spitting fire into the encroaching mass. The chamber became a storm of light and shadow, plasma bolts carving arcs through the darkness, ichor sizzling as it vaporized. The alien ship screamed, a sound that was not mechanical but alive, a howl that reverberated through marrow and memory alike. Ray's rifle clicked empty. She cursed, slamming a fresh cell into place. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady, locked on the writhing core. Captain, it's not just healing, it's growing. Every shot feeds it. Kale's stomach twisted. He could see it now. The core wasn't merely regenerating. It was adapting. Each wound they inflicted became a new mouth, a new vein, a new pulse. The creature was learning their rhythm, their tactics, their desperation. The voice surged again, louder, crueler. You are the scream. You are the silence. You are the void that feeds me. Kale staggered, knees buckling, his vision blurred, HUD collapsing into static. He felt the weight of the alien will pressing down, suffocating, crushing. For a heartbeat, he saw himself not as Kale but as a hollow shell, a puppet dangling on strings woven from shadow. No, he growled, forcing himself upright. His voice was raw, torn from the depths of defiance. We are not yours, we are the fire that burns shadows. He raised his cutter, driving it into the core once more. The blade sank deep, sizzling through layers of living tissue. The chamber convulsed, walls rippling like water struck by stone. The squad staggered, but they held formation, weapons blazing. Vance hurled another charge, the detonation ripping a crater into the core's surface. Black bile sprayed outward, coating armor, burning through plating. Ray's screamed as the acid ate into her gauntlet, flesh beneath sizzling. She tore the glove free, tossing it aside, her hand blistered and raw. Medic, she gasped, clutching her wrist, but there was no medic. Only soldiers, only fire, only the void pressing closer. Kale's mind raced. Tactics, probabilities, death spirals. Every option ended in silence. Yet silence was not defeat, it was surrender, and Kale would not surrender. Vance, he barked, link the charges, chain them through the walls. We'll collapse the chamber around it. Vance hesitated, eyes wide. That'll bury us alive. Kale's gaze was steel. Better buried than consumed. Ray's gritted her teeth, pain etched across her face. Do it. If we fall loud. The squad moved with grim purpose, planting charges along the walls, weaving a lattice of destruction. Each placement was a prayer, each wire a promise. The chamber pulsed faster, veins bulging, tendrils thrashing. The voice screamed, a cacophony of rage and hunger. You cannot sever the song, you cannot silence the void. You are mine. Kale ignored it, focusing on the rhythm of his breath, the weight of the cutter in his hand, the faces of his squad, scarred, bloodied, resolute. They were not meat, they were not dust, they were soldiers. Charges set, Vance called, sweat dripping down his brow. Kale raised his sidearm, eyes locked on the core. On my mark, the chamber trembled, walls splitting, bile flooding. The core surged, veins lashing outward, hooks clattering against steel. The squad fired, plasma bolts carving arcs of defiance. Kale's finger tightened on the trigger. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of command, the gravity of defiance. Mark, the charges detonated. Fire ripped through the chamber, walls collapsing inward, veins snapping, bile vaporizing. The core convulsed, shrieking, its pulse faltering. The squad was thrown against the floor, armor cracking, visors shattering. Kale lay on his back, chest heaving, ears ringing. Smoke filled the chamber, thick and choking. He coughed, blood spraying across his visor. The core was broken, shattered into fragments, but even in ruin it pulsed, weak, faint, but alive. The voice whispered, softer now, almost tender, you burn. You bleed, you fall, but you are mine still, always mine. Kale closed his eyes, exhaustion pressing down like lead. He could feel the squad around him, breathing, bleeding, alive. They had not surrendered, they had not fallen silent. He opened his eyes, staring into the smoke, into the faint pulse that refused to die. His voice was hoarse, but it carried. We'll fight, he said, until the void itself screams. The chamber trembled, the pulse quickening once more. Outside the silent void's armada drifted closer, endless shadows swallowing the stars. Inside, the infection grew, stronger, hungrier, waiting. And the squad stood, battered but unbroken, ready to carve their names into extinction. The acrid scent of burnt polymer clung to Kale's nostrils as he pushed himself up on trembling forearms, the weight of his combat plate grinding against shattered ribs. Smoke curled in lazy eddies, catching the faint glow of emergency strips that sputtered along the fractured bulkhead like dying fireflies. Each breath rasped through his throat, a ragged whistle that tasted of copper and ozone. Visor cracks spider webbed across his left eye, distorting the world into a kaleidoscope of jagged light and shadow. He forced his gaze upward. The alien core, once a humming monolith of obsidian lattice and throbbing violet veins, now lay in a crater of twisted metal and splintered ceramite. Shards jutted like black teeth, each fragment still pulsing with a sickly luminescence that throbbed in time with his own heartbeat. The infection, a viscous black ichor that seeped from the ruptured nodes, crawled across the floor in slow, deliberate tendrils, seeking any breach in the armor, any crack in the resolve. Status, Kale rasped, his voice hoarse but edged with the iron command that had kept his squad alive through 3 sieges and a dozen false alarms. Mara, her left arm hanging limp at her side, dragged herself onto her knees. The impact had sheared off the servo assist in her gauntlet, leaving the limb a dead weight. She pressed a palm to the wound, feeling the warm slick of her own blood mixing with the alien ooze. Plasma coils fried, she muttered, eyes flickering to the sputtering conduit that snake-like coiled around a nearby support column. Secondary power S at 12%. We've got maybe 30 seconds before the backup fails completely. Jack's helmet askew coughed up a spray of dark fluid that clung to the inside of his visor. He wiped it away with the back of his glove, smearing the substance across his cheek. Sensors are picking up a resonant spike, something S trying to reboot the core. It's not just a pulse, it's a heartbeat. And it's getting stronger. He glanced at the flickering readout on his wrist pad, the numbers jumping erratically. 03071.2, if it hits full sync, we're looking at a cascade. The whole chamber could go critical. Lion, the squad's medic, was already moving, her boots scraping over shards of ceramite as she knelt beside a fallen trooper. Corin, his helmet cracked open, a thin line of blood tracing his temple. She ripped open his med kit, the hiss of the seal breaking echoing like a dying breath. He's got a pulmonary contusion, she said, voice low, urgent. I can seal the lung, but I need a clean field, the infection spreading through the air vents. If we don't seal them, we'll all be breathing that stuff. Kale's mind raced, each thought a blade cutting through the fog of pain. The chamber was a tomb, yes, but also a choke point. If they could redirect the core's residual energy, perhaps they could overload it, turn the alien's own power against it. But that required precision, time, and a steady hand, none of which they had in abundance. He shoved himself onto his knees, the pain in his chest flaring like a brand. "Listen up," he barked, voice cracking but commanding. "We're not dying here because some alien god decided to whisper sweet nothings in our ears. We're going to make it scream." He gestured with his blood-slicked glove toward the conduit Mara had identified. "Mara, you and Jax rig a feedback loop into the plasma coil, overload it, send a reverse pulse down the core's lattice. If we can jam its resonant frequency, we might buy ourselves a window." Mara nodded, jaw set. "On it." She began to pry open the access panel, her fingers slick with alien ichor, each movement deliberate despite the tremor in her hand. Sparks flew as she severed a damaged conduit, the exposed wires crackling with unstable energy. Jax moved to the auxiliary power node, his gauntlet sparking as he rerouted power cells from his own suit to the makeshift circuit. "Diverting 15%, he muttered, eyes never leaving the readout. "If we push too hard, we'll fry the whole grid. Gotta find the sweet spot." Lion, meanwhile, tore strips of med foam from her kit and pressed them against the vent grates, the foam expanding and sealing the openings with a hiss that sounded almost like a sigh. She sprayed a thin layer of antiseptic mist over the seals, the vapor hissing as it met the black ooze, causing it to recoil and sputter. "Sealing vents now," she reported, voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "Infection's contained for now, but it's trying to find another way in." Cale felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the sharp clarity that came when death hovered at shoulder height. He reached for the combat knife strapped to his thigh, its blade etched with the sigil of the ASF, an inverted sword wrapped in a circle of stars. He drew it, the metal singing softly as it left its sheath, and pressed the tip against the nearest shard of the alien core. The contact sent a jolt up his arm, a vibration that resonated through his bones. "Corin," he whispered more to himself than to the fallen trooper, "you held the line. Now we finish what you started." He twisted the blade, leveraging the shard to create a makeshift fulcrum. With a grunt, he pried a larger fragment free, the obsidian groaning as it shifted. The black ichor surged upward, seeking the new opening, but Lion's sealed vents held for now. "Fire in the hole," Mara shouted, her voice raw. She slammed a makeshift capacitor, cobbled from a spare power cell and a length of superconductive wire, into the feedback loop she'd rigged. The coil whined, a high-pitched keen that rose above the crackle of static as the plasma surge built. Jax's hands flew over the controls, balancing the influx. Hold now," he yelled, slamming a manual override. The conduit discharged, a blinding arc of azure plasma lanced into the core's lattice, striking at the heart of its resonant frequency. For a heartbeat, the violet glow flared, then stuttered, the pulsing rhythm faltering as the feedback wave slammed into it like a tidal force. The chamber shuddered. Metal screamed as stress fractures spider-webbed across the walls. The alien core convulsed, its tendrils thrashing, spewing black ichor in violent arcs that struck the ceiling and rained down like molten rain. The infection, sensing the disruption, surged forward in a desperate wave, seeking any unprotected flesh. Cale lunged, throwing himself over Lion as a tendril lashed out, striking the spot where she had been kneeling. The impact drove the air from his lungs, but he twisted, bringing his combat knife down in a brutal arc that severed the tendril mid-flight. Black fluid sprayed, sizzling where it met his heated blade. Mara, eyes wild, ducked as another tendril whipped past her head, shredding the edge of her vest. She fired a burst from her sidearm compact, pulsed laser into the mass of ichor, each bolt vaporizing a section of the ooze with a sharp hiss. The smell of burnt ozone intensified, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Jax, his visor cracked and smeared with alien residue, staggered backward as a surge of energy rippled through the makeshift circuit. The feedback loop overloaded, and for a fraction of a second the entire chamber was bathed in a blinding white light that seemed to erase shadows, exposing every crevice, every shard of debris, every terrified face. When the light receded, the core's pulse was erratic, weak, sputtering. The black ichor recoiled, pulling back into the ruptured nodes as if wounded. The walls, though groaning, held. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the squad and the distant, ever-present hum of the silent void's armada beyond the hull, a low, omnipresent thrum that spoke of endless shadow and inevitable doom. Cale pushed himself to his feet, each movement a testament to pain and stubborn will. He looked at his comrades, Mara's grim set jaw, Jax's blood-spattered gauntlet, Lion's steady hands still pressing med foam into a fresh tear in her suit, Corin's limp form nearby, a silent reminder of the cost. He lifted his visor enough to stare directly at the dying core, its fractured surface now a mosaic of dark glass and fading violet light. The alien voice, that insidious whisper that had slithered into his mind during the battle, was gone, replaced by the hollow echo of his own heartbeat. "We'll fight," he said again, quieter this time but no less resolute, "until the void itself screams." A shudder ran through the deck as the Armada outside shifted, its endless shadow sliding a fraction closer, as if sensing the defiance within the wounded ship. The infection, though weakened, still clung to the fissures, a black stain waiting for an opportunity. Cale tightened his grip on his knife, feeling the weight of the squad's resolve settle into his bones. They were battered, bleeding, but unbroken. The chamber was a tomb but also a forge, where desperation was tempered into resolve, and every breath drawn was a promise whispered to the stars that refused to go out. Outside, the silent void waited. Inside, the squad stood, knives clenched, lasers hot, hearts pounding, a flicker of defiance against the inexorable dark. They would carve their names into extinction, or they would die trying. Either way, the void would hear them scream. Chapter 4, Ashes in the Hull. The corridor was a wound carved into steel, its walls trembling with the distant thunder of alien bombardment. Sparks spat from ruptured conduits, showering the squad in brief, violent bursts of light that painted their armor in jagged silhouettes. The air was thick with the stench of scorched insulation and blood, a suffocating haze that clung to every breath. Cale led them forward, knife still clenched in his gauntlet, the blade's edge catching the flicker of emergency strobes like a shard of defiance. Mara's voice cut through the static of their comms, low and sharp, hull integrities dropping. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before this section collapses." Her jaw was set, her eyes hard behind the cracked visor. She moved like a predator forced into retreat, every step measured, every glance scanning for threats that lurked in the shadows. Jax staggered behind her, gauntlet smeared with drying blood, his breathing ragged. He pressed his shoulder against the wall for balance, leaving a crimson smear across the steel. 10 minutes is enough, he growled, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the exhaustion gnawing at him. "We don't need more, we just need to make them bleed." Lion kept pace, her hands steady despite the tremor in the deck beneath them. She carried the med kit like it was a weapon, her fingers stained with the residue of med foam. Her eyes flicked to Corin's limp form strapped to the stretcher rigged from torn plating. Every jolt of the ship threatened to throw him into oblivion, but she held him steady, her lips pressed into a thin line. She whispered something under her breath, prayers, curses, promises. It was impossible to tell. The ship groaned, a leviathan in its death throes. The alien Armada's shadow pressed against the viewport slits, blotting out the stars. The void was no longer silent. It was alive with the hum of enemy vessels, their outlines vast and merciless, drifting like predators circling wounded prey. Gale felt the weight of their presence pressing against his skull, a suffocating reminder that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and already half dead. "Command deck S ahead," Cale said, his voice steady despite the chaos. He tightened his grip on the knife, the steel biting into his palm. "We hold it, we buy time, we lose it, we're dust." They reached the blast doors, half open, twisted by the impact of a plasma strike. The edges glowed faintly, heat still radiating from the wound. Mara crouched, scanning the gap. Her rifle hummed as she powered it up, the barrel glowing faintly. "Movement inside," she whispered. "Not ours." Cale nodded once. "Stack up." Jax pressed against the wall, his gauntlet flexing, blood dripping from the cracks in his armor. Lion positioned herself behind him, medkit slung across her back, one hand hovering near her sidearm. Mara took point, rifle raised, eyes narrowed. Cale slid into place, knife ready, heart pounding like a war drum. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Then Cale gave the signal. They surged forward, slipping through the twisted gap like shadows. The command deck was a graveyard of shattered consoles and burning circuitry. Screens flickered with static, casting ghostly light across the wreckage. And in the center, alien forms, tall and skeletal, their armor glistening with an oily sheen, their eyes burning with violet fire. The squad froze for a fraction of a heartbeat, then the deck erupted. Mara fired first, her rifle spitting bolts of searing plasma that tore through the nearest alien, its body convulsing as violet ichor sprayed across the consoles. Jax roared, swinging his gauntlet like a hammer, smashing into another creature's chest and sending it sprawling against the wall. Cale lunged, knife flashing, carving into the throat of a third, the blade sinking deep as the alien's whispering voice died in a gurgle. The aliens moved with inhuman grace, their limbs bending at impossible angles, their weapons humming with lethal energy. One raised a blade of pure light, slashing toward Lion. She ducked, rolling across the deck, her sidearm barking as she fired into its chest. The creature staggered, violet fire spilling from the wound, but it did not fall. "Hold the line," Cale bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. No retreat. The deck became a storm of violence. Plasma bolts screamed, knives clashed against alien steel, the air thick with smoke and blood. Mara fought like a machine, every shot precise, every movement calculated. Jax was a beast, his fury driving him forward even as his body faltered. Lion moved with desperate precision, her hands steady even as her heart raced, her eyes flicking constantly to Corin's still form. Kale felt the weight of command pressing against him, heavier than the knife in his hand. Every decision was a gamble, every breath a risk. He saw the squad faltering, exhaustion gnawing at their bones, fear clawing at their resolve, and yet they fought. They screamed against the void, their defiance echoing louder than the alien whispers. The last alien fell, its body crumpling into a heap of violet fire. The deck was silent again, save for the crackle of burning consoles and the ragged breaths of the squad. Kale stood in the center, knife dripping, chest heaving. His visor was cracked, his armor scorched, but his eyes burned with unyielding fire. Mara lowered her rifle, her hands trembling. "That was just a vanguard," she said, her voice hollow. "The Armada's still out there. This was nothing." Jack spat blood onto the deck, his gauntlet hanging limp at his side. "Then let them come," he growled. "We'll tear them apart piece by piece." Lion knelt beside Corin, her hands trembling as she checked his pulse. Lips moved silently, whispering promises to a man who could no longer hear them. Her eyes glistened, but she did not falter. Kale looked at them, broken, bleeding, but unbroken. He felt the weight of the void pressing against the hull, the endless shadow waiting to consume them. And he knew with a clarity that cut deeper than any blade that their fight was far from over. He raised his knife, the blade catching the flicker of dying light. "We hold this deck," he said, his voice a command carved into steel. "We hold it until the void itself screams." The squad straightened, their resolve hardening. The deck was a tomb, but it was also a fortress. The void pressed closer, its shadow endless, its hunger insatiable. But inside, the squad stood, knives clenched, rifles hot, hearts pounding. A flicker of defiance against the inexorable dark, and in that moment, beneath the silent void, they were not prey, they were the scream. Chapter 5, the hollow echo. The deck groaned beneath Kale's boots as he moved, each step a calculated placement to avoid the spreading pools of ichor and blood. The emergency lighting had shifted to a deeper crimson, casting the corridor in hues of dried rust and old wounds. His knife remained drawn, the blade singing a low metallic hum as it cut through the stagnant air. "Lion's status on life support," he said, his voice flat, stripped of emotion. She didn't look up from Corin's body. Her fingers had stopped trembling, now moving with mechanical precision as she closed his eyes, then pressed her palm flat against his chest plate. "Secondary systems are cycling. We've got maybe 4 hours of breathable air if we don't find the main scrubbers." "Then we find them." Kale turned, his gaze sweeping across the squad. "Mara, you're on point. Jax, cover our 6. Lion," he paused, watching her rise slowly, her hands still stained with Corin's blood. "You're with me. We need medical supplies and a functioning comms array." Mara moved past him, her rifle tracking across the intersection ahead. Her footsteps were silent, practiced, the gait of someone who had learned to move through slaughterhouses without disturbing the dead. "Command structure's gone," she said, not looking back. "No fleet, no reinforcements, no extraction. What's the play, Sergeant?" Kale followed, his knife still in hand. The corridor opened into a wider maintenance bay, the ceiling lost in darkness above. Pipes ran along the walls like exposed veins, some ruptured, venting steam that curled and twisted in the dim light. "We find the Armada's weakness. Every ship has a flaw. Every commander makes a mistake, and if they don't," Jax's voice came from behind, gravelly and laced with pain. He was favoring his left side, his damaged gauntlet hanging useless, but his right hand gripped his shotgun with white-knuckled intensity. Kale stopped. He turned slowly, meeting Jax's eyes through the cracked visor. "Then we make them bleed until they do." The maintenance bay stretched before them, a cathedral of rusted metal and dying machinery. Workbenches lay overturned, tools scattered across the floor like offerings to a forgotten god. In the center, a single emergency beacon pulsed weakly, its light casting long shadows that seemed to breathe with the ship's failing heart. Lion moved to a terminal, her fingers dancing across the cracked screen. "I've got partial schematics. The main life support is 3 decks down, but there's a secondary command center 2 levels up. If we can establish a local network, we might be able to access the ship's tactical logs." "Do it," Kale said, "but we secure this deck first. I don't want anything behind us when we push deeper." Mara crouched beside an overturned crate, her hand brushing against the splintered wood. "These are supply containers, standard issue. But look at the markings." She traced her finger along a symbol burned into the side, a jagged circle with 3 intersecting lines. "This isn't fleet standard. This is private military, black site contractor." Kale's jaw tightened. "The Armada didn't find us. Someone sold us out." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Jack spat again, the blood mixing with the grime on the deck. "Figured as much. No way those things knew exactly where to hit. They punched through our defenses like they had the fucking blueprints." "Because they did." Kale sheathed his knife, the blade clicking into place with finality. "Lion, I need names. Every contractor, every supply chain, every back-channel deal that touched this ship. Someone on this station knew what was coming and they didn't warn us." Lion's fingers stopped moving. She looked up, her eyes hollow, the grief still raw but now tempered with something colder. And when I find them, Kale picked up a discarded rifle from the deck, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. Then we have a conversation. The squad moved deeper into the bay, their formation tight, their breathing synchronized. The darkness pressed against them, thick and cloying, carrying the scent of ozone and copper. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound echoed twice, once from the walls, once from the silence between heartbeats. Mara stopped at a bulkhead door, her hand hovering over the release. I'm reading heat signatures, multiple, they're not moving. Hostile, Jax asked, his shotgun rising. Can't tell, they're just there. She looked back at Kale. Could be survivors, could be more of those things. Kale stepped forward, his hand replacing hers on the release. Only one way to find out. He pressed the mechanism and the door groaned open, the hydraulics screaming in protest. The room beyond was a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay scattered across the deck, their armor breached, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and surprise. The walls were painted in arterial spray, the patterns almost artistic in their brutality, and in the center, standing motionless, were three figures in fleet uniforms, their eyes open, their mouths slightly agape, their hands hanging limp at their sides. Contact, Mara breathed, her rifle trained on the nearest figure. The figure turned. Its movements were fluid, wrong, as if the joints were moving in reverse. Its eyes locked onto Kale, and its mouth opened, but instead of words, a sound emerged, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in Kale's bones. Don't let them speak, Kale said, his voice barely a whisper. The figure's hum grew louder, and the other two turned in unison, their movements synchronized, their empty eyes fixed on the squad. Kale raised his rifle. Fire, the bay erupted in thunder and muzzle flash. The first round from Kale's rifle caught the lead figure square in the chest, a clean shot that would have dropped any human combatant. The figure didn't flinch. The round punched through the uniform, through the flesh beneath, and exited out the back, leaving a smoking crater that should have been fatal. The figure kept advancing, its hum shifting into something higher, more urgent, a frequency that made Kale's teeth ache. Headshots, he shouted, adjusting his aim. Center mass isn't stopping them. Mara's rifle cracked twice in rapid succession. The first round took the left figure in the throat, the second in the eye socket. The creature's head snapped back, its neck breaking with a wet crack, but its body kept moving, arms outstretched, fingers twitching like the legs of a dying spider. The hum from its ruined throat continued, now a gurgling, wet sound that was somehow worse than the original. Fuck, Jax growled, leveling his shotgun. The weapon's roar was a physical force in the confined space, the slug taking the center figure's head clean off at the jawline. The body stumbled, its momentum carrying it forward 2 more steps before it collapsed, the hum finally dying with a last, rattling exhale. The third figure was on them before they could reload. It moved with a speed that defied physics, crossing the 20 meters of blood-slicked deck in less than a second. Its hand closed around Vasquez's throat before the Marine could bring her rifle to bear. She choked, her eyes bulging, her hands clawing at the thing's grip. The creature's head tilted, studying her with an almost clinical detachment, its mouth opening wide, wider than any human jaw should open, and from that darkness came a sound like grinding metal, like the scream of a ship's hull under stress. Kale was moving before he thought. His combat knife was in his hand, the blade finding the gap between the creature's ribs, driving upward into what should have been a lung. The thing didn't react, it didn't even acknowledge the wound. Its grip on Vasquez tightened, and Kale heard something crack in her throat. Jax, now. Jax's shotgun came up, the barrel pressed directly against the creature's temple. The slug exited the other side in a spray of bone and gray matter. The creature's grip loosened, its eyes, those terrible empty eyes, went dark, and it crumpled, taking Vasquez down with it. Silence, the hum was gone. The only sounds were the ragged breathing of the squad, the drip of blood from the ceiling, and Vasquez's choked gasps as she tried to draw air through her damaged throat. Kale was at her side in an instant, his hands finding the wound, applying pressure. Medic, I need a medic, I'm here. Lieutenant Chen appeared at his elbow, her medical kit already open, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. Let me see. Kale moved aside, his eyes scanning the room, his rifle tracking across the bodies, the shadows, the blood-soaked corners. The other 2 creatures lay still, their heads destroyed, their bodies finally at rest, but the room felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, charged with something that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Mara, status. Mara's voice came back tight, controlled. I'm reading more heat signatures, deeper in the ship. They're not moving, but they're there, dozens of them. Dozen. Jax's voice cracked. We barely handled 3. We handled them because we knew what to aim for, Kale said, forcing calm into his voice. Now we know, headshots. High caliber, nothing less. Chen worked quickly, her fingers finding the damage in Vasquez's throat. Her trachea is crushed. I need to intubate, and I need it quiet. Give me 2 minutes. Kale nodded, moving to the door, his eyes fixed on the corridor beyond. The lights flickered, strobing shadows across the walls. The ship groaned around them, a living thing in its death throes. 2 minutes, he repeated. Then we move, we find the bridge, we get answers, and we get the hell off this ship. And if there are more of those things, Mara asked. Kale's jaw tightened. Then we keep shooting until they stop moving. The words were brave, but as he stared into the darkness of the corridor, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A cold, creeping certainty that no matter how many rounds they put into those things, it wouldn't be enough. That the creatures weren't just on this ship, they were everywhere, and they were waiting. The silence between heartbeats stretched, and Kale felt the weight of it pressing down on him, a promise of horrors yet to come. Chapter 7, The Corridor of Echoes. The corridor stretched before them like the throat of some ancient beast, its walls ribbed with conduits and plating that pulsed faintly, as though the ship itself still clung to life. Kale's boots sank into the grime of decades, each step muffled by the oppressive silence. The flickering lights overhead painted the passage in alternating bands of shadow and glare, every strobe a reminder that the ship was not dead, it was watching. Chen's hands moved with surgical precision, her breath shallow as she worked over Vasquez. The hiss of the portable respirator was the only sound that dared intrude. Mara crouched nearby, rifle angled toward the dark, her eyes darting between Kale and the shadows that seemed to breathe at the edges of vision. Jax lingered at the rear, his knuckles white around the grip of his weapon, sweat dripping from his brow despite the chill. Kale's voice was low, a growl meant to anchor them. 2 minutes, hold the line. The ship groaned again, a metallic shudder that reverberated through the deck plates. It was not the sound of machinery, it was the sound of something vast shifting in its sleep. Kale's jaw clenched. He had heard hulls scream before, but this was different. This was not the cry of steel under stress. This was the whisper of something alive. Chen's fingers trembled as she slid the tube into Vasquez's throat. Blood welled, dark and thick, but the seal held. Vasquez's chest rose, shallow but steady. Chen exhaled, her face pale. She's breathing barely. Kale nodded once. Relief was a luxury he could not afford. Good packet, we move. Mara's voice cut through the tension, sharp and urgent. Kale, those heat signatures, they're closer now, not moving but denser, like a wall of them. Jax cursed under his breath. A wall. What the hell does that mean? Kale's eyes narrowed. It means they're waiting. The words hung heavy like a verdict. He stepped forward, rifle raised, the corridor swallowing him in its strobing light. Its sharpened, every nerve screaming. The air was thick, charged, as though the ship itself exhaled static. His skin prickled, hairs rising. He remembered the first time he had felt that sensation on the colony at Vera Prime, moments before the ground split open and the creatures poured out, that same electric dread now coiled around him. Formation, Kale ordered. Mara left flank, Jack's rear guard. Chen, keep Vasquez stable. We move slow, controlled, no noise unless it's a trigger pull. They advanced, boots whispering against steel. The corridor narrowed, conduits pressing closer, the walls sweating condensation that dripped in rhythmic beats. Each droplet echoed like a clock counting down. Kale's eyes scanned every shadow, every flicker. The silence was not empty, it was pregnant, swollen with intent. Mara's breath was steady, but her voice betrayed the strain. Kale, the signatures are layered, not just dozens, hundreds, stacked like they're embedded in the walls. Kale froze, his mind raced, embedded, waiting, dormant. He imagined the creatures pressed into the plating, their bodies fused with the ship, eyes closed, waiting for the signal to awaken. The thought clawed at him, a vision of the corridor erupting in teeth and claws. Jax's whisper was ragged. We're walking into a grave. Kale turned, his gaze hard. No. We're walking into answers, and if the grave comes with them, we'll carve our way out. The words steadied them, but Kale felt the weight of his own lie. He knew the odds. He had seen squads vanish in less, yet something deeper drove him forward, a need to know what the ship carried, what shadow it dragged across the stars. The alien armada was endless, but this vessel, it was different. It was a wound in the void, and wounds bled secrets. They pressed on. The corridor bent sharply, plunging them into deeper shadow. The lights here were weaker, their flicker slower, as though time itself lagged. Kale's boots sank into a film of viscous fluid, the stench acrid, metallic. He crouched, touched it with gloved fingers, warm, fresh. Blood, he muttered, not human. Mara's rifle snapped up, her eyes wide. Movement, ahead. Kale raised his hand. Silence. He strained, listening. The corridor breathed. A faint scrape echoed, metal against metal, deliberate, not random, not mechanical. Something was there, waiting just beyond the bend. Stack up, Kale ordered. His voice was iron. On me. They pressed close, rifles angled, breath shallow. Kale leaned into the corner, his heart hammering. He peeked, quick, controlled. The corridor beyond was wider, a chamber opening into darkness. Shapes lined the walls, hulking, motionless. Dozens, no, hundreds. Their forms were grotesque, twisted, armored in chitin that gleamed faintly. Eyes closed, jaws slack, dormant. Kale's throat tightened. Mara's voice was a whisper of dread. Gods, they're sleeping. Chen's hand tightened on Vasquez's stretcher. Then let's not wake them. Kale's mind raced. The chamber was a nest, a cathedral of silence. The creatures were arrayed like statues, guardians of some unseen altar. He felt the weight of their presence pressing against his skull, a psychic hum that gnawed at thought. He forced it down, forced focus. We move through, Kale said. His voice was low, commanding. Slow, no sudden noise, eyes forward. If one stirs, head shots. No hesitation, they stepped into the chamber. The air was thick, humid, reeking of decay. Every breath tasted of rot. Their boots sank into layers of organic residue, the floor slick with secretion. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of light running through them, feeding the dormant horde. Kale's stomach churned. This was not a ship, it was a womb. Mara's eyes darted, her finger tight on the trigger. Kale, why aren't they attacking? Kale's jaw clenched. Because they don't need to, not yet. The silence pressed harder, a weight on their chests. Jax's breath came ragged, his eyes wide. He muttered, half to himself, half to the void. We're ants in a giant's ribcage. Kale ignored him, forcing his steps steady. His mind clawed at the possibilities. Were the creatures waiting for a signal, a command, or were they simply conserving, storing their hunger for the moment the void demanded it? He felt the truth gnawing at him. This was not a random derelict. This was a staging ground, a seed of the Armada. They reached the center of the chamber. The floor rose slightly, forming a dais. At its heart stood a console, alien yet familiar, its surface alive with faint glyphs. Kale's breath caught. This was it, the bridge, the answers. Mara, cover Jack's perimeter. Jen, hold position. Kale stepped forward, his boots squelching in the filth. He reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the console. The glyphs flared, light spilling across the chamber. The creatures stirred, faint tremors running through their bodies. Eyes flickered, jaws twitched. Kale's heart slammed against his ribs. Kale, Mara's voice was sharp, panicked. They're waking. Kale's hand tightened on the console. The glyphs pulsed, a rhythm that matched the ship's groan. He felt it then, a voice not spoken but pressed into his mind. Cold, vast, endless. We are the shadow, we are the silence, we are already here. Kale staggered, his vision swimming. The chamber vibrated, the creatures shuddering, their eyes snapping open one by one. The silence shattered, replaced by the hiss of breath, the scrape of claws. The void screamed. Positions, Kale roared, his voice a whip. Head shots, fire at will. The chamber erupted in gunfire, the staccato thunder of rifles tearing into the dark. Muzzles flared, shadows danced, and the creatures surged forward, their scream a chorus of hunger. Kale's mind burned with the echo of that voice, the certainty that this was only the beginning, and beneath the roar of battle, the ship itself whispered, alive and endless. Chapter 8, beneath the silent void the chamber was a storm of chaos. Gunfire cracked like thunder, muzzle flashes painting the walls in strobing bursts of light. The creatures surged forward, their bodies slick with some unholy secretion, claws raking against the steel floor. Each step they took reverberated through the chamber, a drumbeat of inevitability. Kale's rifle bucked against his shoulder, each shot precise, controlled, aimed at the glistening skulls that lunged from the shadows. His breath came ragged, the acrid stench of burned propellant filling his lungs. The console behind him pulsed with alien light, glyphs shifting like living veins, whispering in a language that wasn't meant for human ears. Mara, left flank. Keep them pinned, Kale barked, his voice cutting through the cacophony. Mara's response was a guttural growl, her rifle spitting fire as she pivoted, boots grinding against the slick floor. She moved like a predator, her body low, her eyes locked on the advancing tide. Each burst tore chunks from the creatures, spraying black ichor across the chamber walls. Jax's heavy machine gun roared, the barrel glowing red as he swept the perimeter. The weapon's thunder drowned out the hiss of the creatures, each round punching through bodies, tearing limbs free. He was a wall, immovable, his stance wide, his teeth bared in a snarl. Chen, Kale shouted, his voice strained. Status, Chen's reply was clipped, precise, even as he fired in controlled bursts. Holding position, ammo at 60%, they're testing our perimeter. Kale's eyes flicked to the console. The glyphs pulsed faster now, the rhythm syncing with the ship's groan. The voice pressed harder into his mind, cold and infinite. We are the silence, we are the shadow, you cannot kill what is already dead. Kale gritted his teeth, forcing the intrusion back. His finger tightened on the trigger, another creature collapsing in a spray of ichor, but the words lingered, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. The chamber shook, a deep vibration that rattled teeth and bones. From the far end, a larger form emerged, towering, armored in chitin that shimmered under the flickering light. Its eyes burned with a pale luminescence, its maw opening to release a guttural roar that reverberated through the chamber. Contact, heavy unit. Mara's voice was sharp, urgent. Kale's stomach clenched. This wasn't just another drone. This was a commander, a beast bred for war. Jax, suppress. Chen, grenades now, Kale ordered, his voice a whip crack. Jax pivoted, his machine gun hammering into the beast's chest. The rounds sparked against the chitin, ricocheting harmlessly. The creature advanced undeterred, each step shaking the floor. Chen's hand snapped to his belt, pulling free a fragmentation grenade. He yanked the pin, the metal ring clattering to the floor, and hurled it with practiced precision. The grenade bounced once, twice, before detonating in a thunderous blast. Shrapnel tore through the chamber, ripping into the beast's flank. It staggered, ichor spraying, but it did not fall. Kale's heart slammed against his ribs. Focus fire, aim for the joints. Mara shifted, her rifle barking as she targeted the creature's knees. Jax adjusted, his machine gun chewing into the beast's shoulder. Chen fired in bursts, each round aimed at the gaps in the armor. The beast roared, its clawed hand sweeping forward, smashing into a pillar. The impact sent shards of metal flying, one slicing across Mara's cheek. She hissed, blood streaking her face, but her rifle never wavered. Kale's mind burned with the alien voice, the whispers growing louder. He felt the weight of the void pressing down, the certainty that they were fighting shadows, echoes of something far greater. We are endless. We are hunger. You are already ours. He shook his head violently, forcing the words back. His rifle snapped up, sights locking on the beast's glowing eyes. He squeezed the trigger, the round punching through one socket in a spray of ichor. The creature staggered, its roar faltering. Push, push, Kale roared, his voice raw. The squad surged forward, their weapons hammering into the beast. Mara's rifle spat fire, Jax's machine gun thundered, Chen's bursts tore into the chitin. The creature reeled, its body shuddering under the relentless assault. Finally, with a guttural scream, it collapsed, its massive frame crashing to the floor. The impact shook the chamber, dust and ichor spraying into the air. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the squad. The console pulsed, its glyphs shifting, alive. Kale lowered his rifle, sweat dripping from his brow. His hands trembled, the echo of the voice still gnawing at his mind. He stepped toward the console, his boots squelching in the filth. "Mara, Jax, Chen," he said, his voice low, commanding, "hold perimeter, nothing gets through." He reached out, his fingers brushing the console once more. The glyphs flared, light spilling across the chamber. His vision swam, the voice pressing harder. "You cannot fight the void. You cannot fight what you cannot see." Kale's jaw clenched. "We'll see about that." The chamber trembled, the walls groaning as if alive. The creatures' bodies twitched, ichor pooling around them. The console's light grew brighter, the glyphs shifting into patterns that burned into Kale's mind. He saw it then, a vision vast and endless. A fleet black as the void stretching across the stars, ships that dwarfed mountains, their hulls alive with shadow. Fighters screamed against them, human voices lost in the silence, and beneath it all the certainty that this was only the beginning. Kale staggered back, his breath ragged. His squad watched him, their eyes wide, their weapons still raised. "What did you see?" Mara's voice was sharp, demanding. Kale's eyes met hers, his voice low, heavy. "The Armada, endless, already here." The chamber shook again, dust raining from the ceiling. The console pulsed, its light growing brighter, the whispers louder. Kale raised his rifle, his voice a growl. "We hold, we fight. We don't break." The squad tightened their grips, their eyes hard. The chamber was alive, the void pressing in, the whispers endless, and beneath it all the silence screamed. Chapter 9. The chamber's walls groaned like the bones of some ancient beast, the glyphs pulsing with a rhythm that was not light but hunger. Dust fell in thin curtains, catching the glow and turning the air into a haze of fractured brilliance. Kale's breath rasped against the inside of his helmet, each inhale a reminder of the stale oxygen reserves dwindling in his suit. Chen's voice cut through the static, sharp, commanding. Perimeter holding, movement in the shadows but nothing breaching. Yet Kale's eyes flicked across the squad. Mara crouched low, rifle braced against her shoulder, her gaze locked on the shifting dark beyond the chamber's edge. Juno's hands trembled as he adjusted the power feed on the plasma coils, sweat streaking down his temple despite the chill. Every soldier's face was carved with the same tension, an awareness that the void was not just outside but pressing against their minds, whispering through the cracks of their sanity. The console's light surged again, glyphs rearranging into jagged spirals that seemed to claw at Kale's vision. He forced himself to look, to endure the burn. The vision returned, ships vast as continents, their hulls alive with writhing shadow. Fighters screamed against them, human voices swallowed by silence. He could almost hear the tearing of steel, the muffled cries of pilots dying unseen. "Command," Kale growled into the comm, his voice low, guttural. "We've confirmed Armada presence. They're here, they're endless." Static answered, then a voice faint, fractured. "Kale, hold perimeter, reinforcements inbound." The transmission died, eaten by the void's interference. Mara's jaw tightened. Reinforcements, against that. She gestured toward the console, toward the vision that none of them could see but all of them felt. Kale's grip tightened on his rifle. "We hold, we fight, we don't break." The chamber trembled again, harder this time. A fissure split across the far wall, black ichor spilling through like blood from a wound. The ichor writhed, forming shapes, limbs, claws, faces half-formed and screaming. Chen barked orders. "Suppressive fire, keep it contained." Bolts of plasma lit the chamber, streaks of blue-white cutting through the haze. The ichor recoiled, shrieking without sound, its forms collapsing into pools that hissed against the stone floor. Juno cursed under his breath. "It's not dying, it's reforming. Every shot just slows it." Kale stepped forward, his boots sinking into the ichor. The substance clung, pulling at him, whispering in voices that were not human. He raised his rifle, firing point-blank into the mass. The glyphs on the console flared in response, the chamber vibrating with a resonance that rattled his bones. The ichor shrieked again, collapsing back into the fissure. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. Kale's chest heaved. He turned to the squad, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. They're testing us, probing. The Armada doesn't waste resources. This is reconnaissance. They're watching. Mara's eyes narrowed. Watching through what? That console. Those glyphs. Kale glanced at the console, its light now dimmer, the glyphs shifting slower, almost languid. Through everything, through us. The squad fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down like gravity. Then faint at first came the sound, not whispers, not static. A hum deep and resonant, vibrating through the chamber floor. It grew, building into a roar that was not sound but pressure, pressing against their skulls, their lungs, their hearts. Chen staggered, clutching his helmet. What the hell is that? Kale's eyes widened. He knew. He had seen it in the vision. The Armada's fighters, silent in the void but screaming in the mind. The chamber walls split further, fissures spiderwebbing outward. Through them, glimpses of the void, black, endless, alive. Shapes moved within, sleek and predatory, their outlines jagged against the nothingness. Fighters, alien, countless. Mara's voice was a whisper, trembling. They're here. Kale raised his rifle, his voice a growl. Positions, we hold this ground. The squad snapped into motion, rifles braced, plasma coils charged. The chamber became a fortress, every soldier a wall against the tide. The fissures widened and the fighters poured through, not ships of steel, but constructs of shadow, their forms shifting, their edges bleeding into the void. They moved with impossible speed, darting across the chamber, their presence a blur of hunger and malice. Plasma fire erupted, bolts streaking through the haze. Shadows tore apart, shrieking, reforming. The squad fought with desperation, every shot a prayer, every movement a defiance against inevitability. Kale's mind burned with the vision, the certainty that this was only the beginning. He saw the Armada stretching across the stars, endless, unstoppable. He saw humanity's fleet screaming against them, voices lost in silence. And he knew this chamber was not a battlefield, it was a crucible. The console flared again, glyphs rearranging into a spiral that pulsed with rhythm. Kale felt it in his chest, his veins, his bones, a call, a command. He staggered, his vision swimming. The voice returned, pressing harder. You cannot fight the void, you cannot fight what you cannot see. Kale's jaw clenched. He raised his rifle, firing into the console itself. The glyphs shattered, light exploding outward, a shockwave tearing through the chamber. The fighters shrieked, their forms collapsing, dissolving into the void. The fissures sealed, the ichor retreating. Silence fell, heavy, absolute. Kale dropped to one knee, his breath ragged. The squad stared, weapons still raised, eyes wide with disbelief. Mara stepped forward, her voice sharp. What did you do? Kale's eyes met hers, his voice low, heavy. I told the void we don't break. The chamber was quiet now, but the silence was not peace. It was waiting, watching. Kale rose, his rifle steady, his eyes hard. This was only the first scream. The Armada is endless, and we're beneath its shadow. The squad tightened their grips, their eyes hard. The chamber was alive, the void pressing in, the whispers endless, and beneath it all, the silence screamed. Chapter 10. Beneath the silent void, the chamber's walls still trembled with the echo of Kale's defiance, the fractured glyphs bleeding faint motes of light that drifted like dying embers. The silence was not absence, it was pressure, a suffocating weight that pressed against every breath, every heartbeat. The squad stood in formation, rifles raised, eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to thicken with each passing second. Kale's boots scraped against the obsidian floor as he advanced, the rifle heavy in his grip, its barrel still hot from the burst that had shattered the console. His breath rasped through the rebreather, each inhale a reminder of the thin line between survival and collapse. He could feel the void watching, not with eyes but with intent, an endless awareness that seeped into marrow and thought alike. Perimeter, Kale ordered, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the oppressive quiet. No blind angles, we hold this ground until command relays extraction. Mara snapped her fingers, signaling the squad. They moved with precision, boots thudding against the chamber floor, rifles sweeping arcs of invisible fire. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls etched with spirals that pulsed faintly as though the void itself breathed through them. Joran's voice broke the silence, tight with unease. Extraction, you think command even knows we're alive? Kale turned, his visor reflecting the faint glow of the glyphs. They'll know when the Armada feels us bite. We're not ghosts yet, the words were iron, but Kale felt the doubt gnawing beneath them. He had seen the Armada stretched across the stars, endless, a tide of black hulls and shrieking fighters that devoured light itself. Humanity's fleets were sparks against the abyss, their screams swallowed whole. And here, beneath the silent void, they were ants clawing at the bones of gods. Mara's rifle swept the chamber, her jaw tight. This place isn't dead, it's waiting, you felt it too. Kale nodded once. The void doesn't sleep, it listens, and it learns. The chamber's spirals flared suddenly, a ripple of light cascading across the walls. The squad froze, rifles raised, fingers tightening on triggers. The glyphs rearranged, shifting into jagged lines that pulsed with rhythm like a heartbeat, but wrong, distorted, too slow, too heavy. Contact, Mara hissed. From the shadows above, forms began to descend. Not ships, not soldiers, something between. Sleek silhouettes, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal, their edges dissolving into smoke. They moved without sound, without weight, drifting down like predators scenting prey. Kale raised his rifle, the barrel tracking the nearest form. Stealth fighters, he muttered, the words bitter. The Armada's scream made flesh. The first fighter lunged, its body elongating, edges sharpening into blades of shadow. Kale fired, the chamber erupting in muzzle flash, the round tearing through the creature's form. It shrieked not sound but vibration, a resonance that rattled teeth and bones. The squad opened fire, the chamber filled with bursts of light and the stench of burning ichor. Hold formation, Kale roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. They bleed, they break, make them scream louder than us. The fighters swarmed, their movements erratic, dissolving into mist and reforming inches away. Mara spun, her rifle barking, rounds tearing through one that lunged for Joran. He stumbled, his visor cracking, but Mara's fire shredded the creature, its form collapsing into a pool of black ichor that hissed against the floor. Kale's mind raced, every instinct screaming that this was not a battle, it was a test. The void was probing, measuring their defiance, their tactics, their fear. He could feel it pressing against his thoughts, whispering in the cracks of his resolve. You cannot fight what you cannot see. Kale snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then we make them visible. He slammed a charge against the floor, the device flaring to life, flooding the chamber with ultraviolet light. The fighters shrieked, their forms outlined in jagged brilliance, their shadows stripped away. The squad seized the moment, rifles blazing, rounds tearing through exposed flesh and metal alike. Push them back, Mara shouted, her voice raw, commanding. Don't give them ground. The chamber shook with the fury of their defiance, the fighters collapsing one by one, their screams reverberating through the spirals etched into the walls. But for everyone that fell, another emerged, drifting down from the endless shadow above. Joran's voice cracked through the comms. There's no end, we're drowning in them. Kale's jaw clenched, his eyes hard. Then we choked the tide. He sprinted toward the console's shattered remains, the glyphs still flickering faintly. His rifle barked, rounds tearing through fighters that lunged to intercept. Mara covered him, her fire precise, her movements sharp, every step a dance with death. Kale reached the console, his hand slamming against the fractured surface. The glyphs pulsed, rearranging, responding to his touch. He felt the void pressing harder, its whispers clawing at his mind. You cannot break the endless. You cannot silence the scream. Kale's teeth ground together, his voice a growl. We don't silence it. We make it hear us. He tore a charge from his belt, slamming it into the console's core. The glyphs flared, light erupting outward, a shockwave tearing through the chamber. The fighters shrieked, their forms collapsing, dissolving into mist that retreated into the shadows above. The chamber fell silent again, the spirals dimming, the pressure easing but not gone, never gone. Kale staggered, his breath ragged, his body trembling. Mara caught his arm, her eyes burning through the visor. You're going to get us all killed. Kale met her gaze, his voice low, heavy. We're already dead if we stop screaming. The squad regrouped, weapons steady, eyes hard. The chamber was quiet now, but the silence was not peace, it was waiting, watching. Kale raised his rifle, his voice carrying through the comms, iron and fire. This was only the first scream. The Armada is endless, and we're beneath its shadow, but we don't break, not here, not ever. The squad tightened their grips, their breath steadying, their eyes fixed on the shadows above. The chamber was alive, the void pressing in, the whispers endless, and beneath it all the silence screamed. Chapter 11. Beneath the silent void, the chamber's silence was a predator, crouched in the dark, waiting for the squad to falter. Every breath rasped against Kale's throat, every heartbeat a drum echoing in the hollow expanse. The glyphs on the fractured console still glowed faintly, their light like dying embers, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the metallic tang of burnt circuitry and the acrid smoke of detonated charges. Kale's boots scraped against the stone floor as he moved forward, rifle raised, the weapon's matte black surface reflecting the faint glow. His visor displayed shifting readouts, oxygen levels dipping, radiation spikes flickering, the squad's vitals pulsing in red and amber. He ignored the warnings. The void pressed harder now, whispering in a chorus that slithered into his skull. You cannot break the endless, you cannot silence the scream. He clenched his jaw, forcing the voices back into the pit of his mind. His squad followed, their movements sharp, disciplined, but every step carried the weight of exhaustion. Mara's breathing was heavy in the comms, her voice cutting through the static. Kale, the charge bought us seconds, not salvation. The fighters will regroup. The Armada doesn't retreat, it reforms. Kale's reply was iron. Then we reform faster. The chamber stretched into a corridor ahead, its walls lined with alien architecture, spirals of obsidian-like material etched with glyphs that pulsed faintly as if alive. The squad advanced, rifles sweeping, fingers tight on triggers. The silence was deceptive. Beneath it, the void screamed, a soundless roar that gnawed at their sanity. Joran, the youngest of the squad, muttered under his breath, his voice trembling. Feels like the walls are watching us. They are, Mara snapped, her tone sharp, cutting through his fear. Keep your weapons steady. If they move, you burn them. Kale halted at the corridor's mouth, raising a clenched fist. The squad froze instantly, rifles angled, eyes scanning. Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Suspended in the center was a structure, a lattice of black metal, twisting upward like a spire, its surface alive with glyphs that shifted and rearranged in patterns too complex for human eyes. Kale's visor flickered, the glyphs translating into fragments of meaning: anchor, conduit, scream. He felt the void pressing harder, the whispers clawing deeper. His vision blurred, the edges of reality fraying. He forced his focus back, his voice low, commanding. That spire is their anchor, it's feeding the Armada. We cut it, we bleed them. Mara's eyes narrowed behind her visor. And if it detonates, then we scream louder. The squad moved into the chamber, boots crunching against the fractured floor. The spire pulsed, its glyphs flaring brighter as if sensing their presence. Shadows shifted above, forms coalescing, alien fighters, their bodies sleek and jagged, wings like blades, eyes burning with void light. They descended silently, their movements predatory, their presence suffocating. Kale raised his rifle, voice a growl. Positions, lock angles, make them hear us. The chamber erupted in fire. Rifles spat streams of plasma, the air crackling with energy. The fighters shrieked, their forms twisting, dissolving into mist only to reform again, endless, relentless. The squad moved with precision, Mara rolling into cover, her rifle barking in controlled bursts, Joran firing wildly, panic in his movements but his shots finding targets. Vera, the heavy gunner, unleashing a torrent of fire that tore through the mist, scattering it into fragments. Kale advanced, every step deliberate, his rifle steady, his mind a storm. The void screamed louder now, its whispers clawing at his resolve. You cannot silence the scream. You cannot break the endless, he snarled, his voice cutting through the comms. We don't silence it. We make it choke on us. The spire pulsed violently, its glyphs flaring, the chamber trembling. The fighters shrieked, their forms multiplying, shadows thickening. The squad was drowning in the endless, their fire barely holding the tide. Mara's voice was sharp, desperate. Kale, we're being overrun. Kale's eyes locked on the spire, its core glowing brighter, a heart of void light. He tore another charge from his belt, slamming it against the rifle's side, the weapon humming with unstable energy. His voice was iron, unyielding. Cover me. He broke into a sprint, boots pounding against the fractured floor, rifle blazing. Fighters descended, claws slashing, wings slicing through the air. Kale ducked, rolled, fired, plasma tearing through void flesh, mist scattering. Mara's rifle barked behind him, her shots precise, cutting down the fighters that lunged for him. Vera's heavy fire roared, a wall of destruction that carved a path. Kale reached the spire, its surface alive, glyphs rearranging, light flaring. He slammed the rifle against its core, the charge embedding, the weapon vibrating violently. The spire screamed, a soundless roar that shook the chamber, the void pressing harder, the whispers clawing deeper. You cannot break the endless, you cannot silence the scream. Kale's teeth ground together, his voice a growl. Then hear us burn, he pulled the trigger. The charge detonated, light erupting outward, a shockwave tearing through the chamber. The spire convulsed, its surface fracturing, glyphs shattering into fragments of light. The fighters shrieked, their forms collapsing, dissolving into mist that retreated into the shadows above. The chamber trembled, the silence screaming louder, the void pressing harder. Kale staggered, his body trembling, his visor flickering. Mara caught his arm, her voice sharp, burning. You're going to kill us all. Kale met her gaze, his voice low, heavy. We're already dead if we stop screaming. The chamber fell silent again, the spire fractured, its light dimming. The squad regrouped, weapons steady, eyes hard. Silence was not peace, it was waiting, watching, endless. Kale raised his rifle, his voice carrying through the comms, iron and fire. This was only the second scream. The Armada is endless, and we're beneath its shadow, but we don't break, not here, not ever. The squad tightened their grips, their breath steadying, their eyes fixed on the shadows above. The chamber was alive, the void pressing in, the whispers endless, and beneath it all the silence screamed. We need to write chapter 12 of 12 for episode 1. The story context ends with the squad after the spire fracture, silence screaming. The chapter must be extremely long, 800-1000 words, detailed show-don't-tell, heavy dialogue, military tactics, psychological suspense, output-only story text. Given it's the final chapter of the episode, likely need to conclude the mission or set up for next episode. The previous context, they destroyed the spire but the void still presses. K.A.L. says we're already dead if we stop screaming. The chamber is silent but waiting, they need to escape. Or confront the endless Armada. The title, Beneath the Silent Void. Stealth fighters scream against the alien Armada's endless shadow. So the Armada is above. This episode ends with a cliffhanger or resolution. I'll write a chapter where they attempt to extract from the alien structure, facing the Void's final assault. Use intense action, psychological horror, and a bleak ending. Let's aim for 900+ words. Chapter 12 the echo of emptiness. The fractured spire bled light, not illumination, but a cold radiance that seeped into the chamber like water through cracked hull plates. Kale watched the glyphs disintegrate, their alien geometry crumbling into motes of silver ash that drifted upward, swallowed by the darkness above. The whispers that had clawed at his skull receded, but the silence they left behind was worse. It was a void that listened. Mara's grip on his arm didn't loosen. Her visor reflected the dying glow of the spire, her face a mask of grim calculation. That charge was meant for the primary breach. We just burned our last heavy ordnance on a religious icon. Kale pulled free, checking his rifle's magazine, half a load. The spire was the relay. Without it, whatever they were doing to us. He gestured at the shadows where the fighters had dissolved. Stops. Stops. Kor's voice crackled over the comms, strained and raw. He was hunched near the chamber's far wall, one hand pressed against his helmet, where the whispers had done something to his neural interface. The biomonitor in Kale's HUD showed Kor's vitals spiking, then flatlining, then spiking again. You hear that? That's not silence, that's hunger. He was right. The quiet pressed against them like a living thing, a held breath before a scream. Dust particles hung suspended in the air, refusing to fall. The temperature dropped. Kale's suit registered a 15-degree plummet in seconds. Frost spiderwebbed across the chamber's floor, creeping toward the squad's boots. Command, this is Ghost Leader. Kale thumbed his long-range comm. Static, not the usual interference of the structure, but a dead, empty frequency that swallowed his words whole. Command, respond, nothing. Primary link is severed, Lieutenant Vance reported, her voice steady despite the tremors running through her gauntlets. Secondary and tertiary too, we're blind down here. Kale's jaw tightened. The spire had been more than a psychic amplifier, it was a beacon, a communication node. Destroying it had cut them off from the hammer of Saul above. But the alternative had been letting those whispers burrow into their brains until they turned on each other. He'd made the choice, now he had to live with it. We push for the surface, Kale said, striding toward the chamber's eastern passage. The tunnel that had brought them here now twisted into a corridor of fused obsidian and organic membrane, the walls pulsing with a sickly green bioluminescence. Rig the remaining charges at the ascent shaft. We blow our way out if we have to. And if the Armada's waiting for us up there, Sergeant Dorn asked, his plasma cannon humming with readiness. The big man's eyes were hollow, his trigger finger twitching. He'd lost 2 of his fire team to the fighters, men who had been with him through 3 campaigns. The grief was etched into every line of his face. Kale stopped at the tunnel's threshold. The green light cast his scarred features into sharp relief. Then we make them pay for every meter of atmosphere we breathe. The squad moved, 7 soldiers reduced from 12, their boots echoing against the corrupted stone. The passage narrowed, forcing them into single file. Kale took point, his rifle's targeting reticle sweeping over every shadow, every crevice where the darkness seemed to thicken. The walls wept a viscous fluid that smelled of ozone and burnt copper. The whispers were gone, but the pressure remained, a weight in the air, a hum just below the threshold of hearing. They advanced for what felt like hours. The structure shifted around them, tunnels branching and merging in patterns that defied geometry. Kale's compass spun uselessly. His suit's inertial tracker had frozen at a depth reading that made no sense. They were kilometers below the surface, yet the ascent shaft should have been only 200 meters from the spire chamber. This place is rearranging itself, Mara muttered, her scanner crackling with false returns. The architecture is adaptive, it's hurting us. Where? Kale asked, toward the heart of the void. She pointed at a glowing symbol seared into the wall ahead, the same glyph from the spire, but inverted, bleeding darkness. That's a directional marker, it's pointing us deeper. Kale stared at the symbol. The air around it shimmered, and for a moment he saw something beyond the stone, a vast, endless space filled with silent shapes, their outlines burning with cold light. The Armada, not above them, but around them. The structure was a tooth in a jaw, a cell in a body. You can't break the endless, the whispers had said. They weren't a threat, they were a statement of fact. Kale raised his rifle. We go where it wants us, but we go armed. The corridor opened into a cavern so vast its walls were lost in shadow. The floor was a lake of black glass, perfectly smooth, reflecting nothing. Above a pinprick of light, the surface, impossibly far, impossibly small, the ascent shaft. But between them and it the void stirred. The fighters emerged from the darkness. Hundreds of them, their forms coalescing from the shadows, their eyes burning with the same cold radiance as the spire. They didn't advance. They waited, a silent audience, their presence pressing against the squad's sanity. Mara's breath caught. Kale, he saw it. In the center of the glass lake, a figure stood, humanoid but taller, its skin a shifting mosaic of void and stars. Its face was smooth, featureless, save for a single glyph burning in the center of its forehead, the same symbol that had marked the spire. The figure raised a hand. The shadows rose with it. Kale's thumb found the detonator for the last charge on his belt. He looked at his squad, exhausted, bleeding, broken, but still standing, still fighting. Form up, he said, his voice carrying through the comms like a blade drawn across steel. We scream until the silence breaks, or we break first. The figure lowered its hand. The void descended. Kale pulled the trigger.